The 5th of April 1933, the American government declared everyone who owned gold guilty overnight and sentenced them to 20 years in prison. No questions asked, no explanation given. Millions of Americans woke up one morning to learn that their wealth was now illegal. This was one of the largest wealth transfers in history, and today, most people don't even know it really happened. Every empire swears its currency is safe. It makes every promise to convince you, and every government insists its promises will last forever. But history proves them wrong every time. Yet no story has been as shocking as what happened in the United States in 1933. Because in this story, the enemy did not come from outside. The enemy was the government the people had chosen to protect them. Wednesday, the 5th of April, 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had been president for just 1 month. America was in the midst of the Great Depression. Banks were failing, unemployment had reached 25%, and the streets were filled with despair. And on that day, FDR signed a document, Executive Order 6102. 6 words change everything. Gold coins, bullion, and certificates are prohibited. This was not a suggestion, it was an order. Every citizen in America had to turn in all their gold to their local Federal Reserve Bank by May 1. In exchange, they would receive paper dollars at the official price of gold, $20.67 per ounce, and if they didn't, a $10,000 fine or 10 years in prison. Or both. In some cases, up to 20 years in prison. Overnight, gold that families had accumulated over generations became contraband. Gold coins passed down from grandfather to grandson, gold bars stored in safes, savings set aside for funeral expenses, all illegal, government property, and everyone would surrender it. How could this be? How could a government seize people's private property? The answer was horribly simple, because it could. The Great Depression had created panic. Banks were failing. People were starving. And FDR turned this crisis into an opportunity. Tough measures were needed to save America, he said. Gold had to be in the hands of the Federal Reserve to revive the economy, he said. But the truth was quite different. The truth was the government was bankrupt. Excessive borrowing in the 1922 and the crash of 1929 had devastated the US Treasury, and the dollar was still tied to gold. Every dollar was backed by a certain amount of gold. This prevented the government from printing as much money as it wanted. There were rules, there were limits, and FDR wanted to remove those limits. But in a gold-backed currency system, you can't print more dollars, because for every dollar, there must be gold in the vault. So what was the solution? Take the gold from the people, by force, and then change the rules. Executive Order 6102 did exactly that. The government seized its citizens' gold, and then, a few months later, it changed the price of gold from $20.67 per ounce to $35, a 69% increase overnight. Think about that. The government forced you to sell your gold for $20. Then the next day, it valued that same gold at $35. The difference? It went into the government's pocket. This was one of the largest wealth transfers in history, and it was done legally. But not everyone complied. Some people tried to hide their gold in their homes, gardens, secret compartments in walls, because they knew paper money couldn't be trusted. The government's promises couldn't be trusted. Gold had been the true form of wealth for 1,000 years, and giving it up meant leaving yourself vulnerable. Federal agents went door to door. Banks examined their customers' records. Anyone who rented a safe deposit box was a suspect, and some were caught. A lawyer named Frederick Barber Campbell defied the executive order and refused to surrender his gold. He was taken to court. He was found guilty. The government's message was clear. Resistance was futile. But this is where the darker side of the story begins. Because this wasn't just about collecting gold. It was about changing the nature of the monetary system. Before 1933, the dollar was a real thing. It was tied to gold. It was tangible, limited, not something the government could just print. After 1933, the dollar became a promise. The government's word. And history shows us how valuable government's words are. In 1934, gold became legal only for foreign governments and central banks. Ordinary Americans could not own gold until 1974. For 41 years, American citizens were deprived of gold for the first time in history. The asset that had been the most reliable form of money for centuries was declared illegal. What kind of country was this? A nation that prided itself on freedom and property rights had stripped its citizens of their most basic form of wealth protection. But history did not stop there, because confiscating gold was only the beginning. The real disaster would come after this move. To understand the gold confiscation of 1933, we must first understand what broke, because Executive Order 6102 did not occur in a vacuum. It was the culmination of the collapse of a centuries-old system, the gold standard. The gold standard was a simple principle. Money had to be backed by gold. Every banknote, every dollar represented real gold in the vault. This prevented governments from arbitrarily printing money. Because gold was limited, you had to dig it out of the ground. It was not infinite, and this limit disciplined governments. In the 19th century, the gold standard was the foundation of world trade. From London to New York, from Paris to Tokyo, every major nation was tied to gold. This ensured that international trade was reliable, because a British pound or an American dollar represented the same amount of gold everywhere in the world. Trust was based on the rule. Gold was that rule. But in 1914, everything changed. World War I broke out, and the war was very expensive. European governments had to pour money into soldiers, weapons, and the front lines. But they didn't have enough gold in their coffers. So what did? They broke the rules. They suspended the gold standard, and they printed as much paper money as they wanted. During the war, this seemed to work. The money fed the army. But when the war ended, the bill came due. Inflation exploded. In Germany, the Weimar inflation became one of the most horrific examples in history. People carried wheelbarrows full of money to buy bread. Pensioners saw their life savings become worthless. And why was this? The government had printed unlimited amounts of money. The gold chain had been broken. America emerged from World War I relatively unscathed. In fact, it grew richer. While Europe was in debt, America was a creditor. The dollar was the world's strongest currency. And Wall Street was the world's financial center. The 1,920 seconds are known in American history as the Roaring Twenties. The stock market was soaring. People were getting rich. Everyone was waiting for the next big opportunity. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming in the system. Banks were lending excessively. Speculation was out of control. And in 1929, the bubble burst. Wall Street crashed. Overnight, millions of people became poor. Banks began to fail. People rushed to banks to withdraw their money, and the fragility of the system was exposed. The darkest truth of the Great Depression was this: banks did not have enough money to give back all the deposits they held, because the money had been lent out to homes, businesses, speculations. And when everyone wanted their money back at the same time, the vaults were empty. Bank runs created a domino effect. Each failing bank caused another to fail. When FDR was elected president in 1933, the system was on the brink of collapse, and his solution was radical. To save the banks, the government had to intervene in the economy. But how? By printing more money. That was the problem. Under the gold standard, you couldn't print more money. Without enough gold in the vault, every new dollar broke the rules. So what did FDR do? He changed the rules. The first step was to collect gold from the public. Executive Order 6102. The second step was to redefine the price of gold. The third step was to separate the dollar from gold, slowly, step by step. In 1934, a new law was passed, the Gold Reserve Act. This law transferred all gold to the ownership of the Federal Reserve, and it fixed the price of gold at $35 per ounce. Citizens had surrendered it at $20.67. The government now valued it at $35. The difference? A hidden tax from the people to the government. But the real blow would come years later, because separating gold from the people opened the door to fiat money. Fiat money is money not backed by a valuable metal like gold or silver. It only holds value based on the government's promise. And history shows us that such money always dies with inflation. In 1971, President Richard Nixon created the world's biggest financial shock. He abolished the Bretton Woods system. That is, he severed the dollar's last link to gold. From that moment on, the dollar was just a piece of paper. It was the government's word. And its value depended on how much was printed. Looking back today, the process that began in 1933 had created a complete transformation. We have moved from gold-backed currency to entirely fiat currency. And what were the results? Inflation. A dollar in 1933 is worth approximately $23 today. A 200–300% loss in value in nearly a century. So, the day FDR confiscated gold wasn't just a transfer of wealth. It changed the very foundation of the monetary system. Gold was taken from the people and placed under government control. And from then on, the value of money was at the mercy of the government. The more they printed, the more it lost value. As promises weakened, inflation rose. Here's the crucial point. The government that banned gold also granted itself unlimited authority to print money, and that authority was never revoked. Today, the Federal Reserve can print as many dollars as it wants. Billions in 2008, trillions in 2020, and every new dollar printed reduces the value of the dollar in your pocket. 1,933 was not a robbery. It was a systemic change. And this change laid the foundation for the inflation, debt, and financial instability we experience today. But not everyone bowed down. History shows us that every great robbery has its victims, but also its escapees. Those who did not surrender their gold in 1933, those who hid it, or those who foresaw what the system would do, they were the ones who won in the years that followed. Frederick Barber Campbell was one of those who resisted. Campbell, a New York lawyer, believed the executive order was unconstitutional. He saw it as an attack on property rights and freedom, and he refused to hand over his gold. The government took him to court, and the court sided with FDR. Campbell was found guilty. His punishment was a fine, but the message was clear. Resist and you will be crushed. But Campbell was not alone. Thousands of Americans hid their gold. Some buried it in their gardens. Some built secret compartments in their homes. Some smuggled it abroad. Switzerland, Panama, Canada. The gold crossed borders and escaped the government's grasp. And in 1974, after gold was legalized again, these people won. The price of gold had risen from $35 per ounce to $180. Those who had stored it and waited became wealthy. Those who handed it over to the government, they received dollars that had been wiped out by inflation. This story is part of a larger lesson. During collapses, those who obey lose, those who question win. Surrendering gold to the government in 1933 was presented as patriotic. But the truth was, the government took your wealth and used it to empower itself, and you, in return, received paper that would lose value. Looking back today, history is repeating itself. In 2008, banks collapsed and the government bailed them out. Trillions of dollars were printed. In 2020, the pandemic shut down the economy and the government printed trillions again. And now, inflation's rising again. Prices are going up. Wages are falling behind. And once again, the system's promises are weakening. So what's the lesson? History keeps telling us the same thing. Governments seize their citizens' wealth during crises. They do this in various ways. Sometimes they confiscate gold. Sometimes they create inflation. Sometimes they raise taxes. But the result is the same, a transfer of wealth from the people to the state. And who gets protected? Those who don't comply. Those who see the system breaking down in advance. Those who hold gold, property, skills, or assets beyond borders. These are the ones who survive every collapse. The lesson of 1933 isn't just about the past. It's about today. Because if the government can seize the people's gold once, who says it won't do it again? If the dollar can be separated from gold and printed without limit, who guarantees it will retain its value? Answer: no one. History shows that no fiat currency lasts forever. They all die of inflation. They all collapse from loss of confidence. And 1933 marked the beginning of the modern world's fiat currency era. So the 5th of April 1933 wasn't just the day gold was confiscated. It was the day people learned the cost of blindly trusting their governments. And today, that lesson is more important than ever. Because collapse isn't rare, collapse is the rule. And protecting yourself starts not with trusting the system, but with understanding real value. Gold has outlasted all empires and all currencies in history. It was outlawed in 1933, but it never lost its value. Because gold is based not on the promises of governments, but on 1,000 years of trust. And history will prove it right once again. If this has given you a new perspective, subscribe. History holds all the answers. I will show you where to look.